The accession of Ukraine into the European Union has always been contested, both within Brussels and in Kiev. The whole story begins in 2005, when President Viktor Yushchenko is calling for full accession of Ukraine into the European Union, and this is strongly supported by the European Parliament back then. However, the Commission had different plans and focused on the Western Balkans instead, only offering an association agreement to Ukraine. At the same time, pro-Russian forces were lobbying hard against any association or accession of Ukraine into the European Union. This only changed in 2014 with the Euromaidan protests and Russia's invasion of Crimea, which finally led to a pro-Western government taking over power and finally signing the association agreement with the European Union.
This is the historic day for my country, and we believe this is the historic day for the entire Europe. We want to be a part of big European family, and this is the first tremendous step in order to achieve for Ukraine its ultimate goal.
However, there was still no perspective for full membership of Ukraine in the EU. Not much changed until 2022, when Russia started invading Ukraine. In that time, the European Union decided to grant candidate status to Ukraine as a sign of solidarity.
The future of Ukraine is within the European Union. The Ukrainian people, you have made a clear choice for freedom, for democracy and rule of law, and we in the EU, we have also made a clear decision. Last June, the 27 EU member states decided to grant candidate status to Ukraine, and this was a major step. Your future is with us in our common European Union.
Since then, we're in accession negotiations between the European Union and Ukraine. One member state of the European Union that could be critical in supporting Ukraine's accession into the EU could be Poland. Already in 2005, they promised Ukraine, we are going to support your membership no matter what. They also closely collaborated on the issues of economics and security.
Reconstruction of Ukraine and supporting Ukraine is a top priority of Polish presidency, and we are here to reaffirm our unwavering support for Ukraine.
However, since the war has been dragging on since more than 3 years, tensions between the two neighbors are rising. And the question remains, is Poland going to remain the staunch supporter of Ukraine that it was for almost 2 decades? Or is it going to lose its grip?
To understand the relation between Ukraine and Poland and its effect on Ukraine's long journey into the European Union, we have to begin with another country, Russia,
which had tried for a long time before 24th February to put us one against each other, and on the other hand was a growing factor bringing us together.
Neither Poland nor Ukraine forgot that our neighbor is as it is, because Russia never refrained from any imperial ambitions, let's say. So there was this mutual consent that we need to somehow cooperate in order to gain more. And this Russian threat was always there, here in this part of the world.
The Russian threat pushed Ukraine and Poland close together, but the effect has been even greater.
Poland has always been a country that was in favor of enlargement of the EU. Why is that? Because I think the underlying motive behind, Polish policy towards that was actually the conviction that, the bigger the European Union, the more secure and the more effective also the European Union can be as an actor in security issues and on international stage. The war in Ukraine makes Poland to a front state, right? Because we border with a country at war. And for Poland, actually, the link between, security and enlargement was so obvious from the very beginning that we didn't need the war to actually show us this, because, the motivation behind Poland to join the European Union and even more, of course, NATO was exactly that. It was a security motivation, If Ukraine is stable, peaceful, and integrated with the West, then the risk that Russia would be a threat not only to Poland but also to the Western Alliance is definitely lower.
This strategic calculus, linking enlargement with collective security, is central to understanding Poland's stance on Ukraine. Long before the war, Russia viewed Ukraine's integration with Western institutions not as a symbolic gesture, but as a geopolitical necessity. Hence, the 2022 invasion was not a wake-up call for Poland. Indeed, it was a confirmation. Guided by this security outlook, Poland emerged as one of Ukraine's foremost supporters. Its commitment goes beyond words, extending across military, logistical, cyber, and humanitarian efforts.
I would characterize the Poland's support to Ukraine from the start of the full-scale invasion as multifaceted and very complex. Many things are not even visible. Of course, one of the most outstanding is the provision of military equipment, among which Poland is actually among the top providers. But even more, I would say, it is the role of Poland as the hub for military support to Ukraine. Basically, every single piece of equipment that goes to Ukraine goes through Poland. So Poland is definitely the main coordinator and sort of the military coordination hub for the support to Ukraine, but it goes far beyond that. Poland has been one of the leading force in training of Ukraine soldiers, but also in a number of other areas, which is also, for example, to do with cybersecurity. So you see that there is really a whole number of types of support that Poland provided to Ukraine, both from this hardcore military point of view to softer measures. And we cannot skip also the fact that Poland has been the major hub for also Ukrainian refugees.
However, this level of involvement has not come without domestic strain. Washaw's firm commitment has come with political and logistical burdens. With an unstable domestic political landscape and broader questions emerging about Europe's long-term posture, Polish leaders increasingly balance solidarity with pragmatism. Thus, the question is not whether Poland supports Ukraine, but how far the support can extend without compromising its national security and internal stability.
And that's why Poland has faced some of the dilemmas in this respect. Most notably, for example, when being asked that if Poland would be among the countries to send its troops, for example, to secure the ceasefire and be to provide a force to stand behind that, not only because of the political consideration and the upcoming presidential elections, even, but also because they are also preparing for another line of defense. Poland has this kind of role of providing security to the rest of the European continent, so that they said, look, we will continue providing what we have done so far, being the logistical hub, coordination hub, and all that. But then there are also some limits to this, and of course this is a sensitive matter inside of Poland, how much military hardware you provide to Ukraine.
Despite this constraint, Poland stays on the side of Ukraine, especially because supporting Ukraine for Poland means much more than only helping its neighbor.
That's the historical legacy of Poland, of being a victim basically of the Russian aggression for, several times and quite continuously. It has been argued that Poland understands very well how it is to be, a victim of the Russian aggression. So basically, this notion that Ukraine fights on our behalf is very much entrenched, I would say, into the political scene in Poland. And that's why Poland was and is still so decisive in helping Ukraine, be it with humanitarian aid, so accepting migrants and integrating them, but also, of course, very much so in terms of, sending military equipment, training Ukrainian soldiers, and actually providing Ukraine with most of the heavy weapons that Poland has at its disposal.
But there is this kind of doctrine that emerged out of the 1990s that it is of national interest to have close relations with Ukraine, with Belarus, with other countries in the Baltics that are natural partners to Poland. So that's actually something that is a bit different to other countries in the region, which have very little historical experience with when dealing with Ukraine. There is definitely this shared perception of security, which is actually with Ukraine, and Ukraine is part of the European security. This mindset of that Ukraine is really providing the shelter and the security for us in Europe. This is actually deeply ingrained longer term in the Polish mindset. Ukraine is now a partner. It's not just a buffer zone to Poles. It is going much beyond that. That's why also Poland is among the top supporters of Ukraine's integration into both the EU and NATO. So they see this as a sort of additional pillar of our security.
Ultimately, Poland's position underscores a critical tension within the European Union, balancing the ideals of unity and support for Ukraine against pragmatic considerations about the European Union's future shape and resilience. The debate of Ukraine's accession is not just about membership, it's about defining the identity and strategic direction of Europe itself. Meanwhile, this European debate intertwines with historical memories that continue to shape bilateral relations between Poland and Ukraine.
We were trying to get Ukraine to the EU. However, there were topics which were very sensitive in the Polish-Ukrainian relations, and these topics most probably Russia has also used.
One of the most contested topics in Ukraine-Polish relations is the Volhynia massacre of 1945.
During the Second World War, the massacre started in 1943, and around 100,000 Poles were killed by Ukrainian insurgent army. What differs is interpretation and kind of background and reasons why this massacre happened. So Ukrainian historians, of course, they put it in a wider perspective. They like to include discriminatory politics of Polish Second Republic towards this region, and they diminish the role of Ukrainian nationalist ideology in this. While what Polish historians do, they underlined that ethnic cleansing of Poles was due to the nationalist ideology of Ukrainian underground. So those are two interpretations, and also historians, they argue about the number of victims. So Poles usually say it's 100,000 or 150,000, while Ukrainians say it's too much. And they try to make a symmetry that those were both Ukrainians and Poles who died during, and they would rather say it was a conflict. So they look for symmetry, as now relations between Ukraine and Poland are very asymmetrical because we are part of the EU, we are safe, and they are under war.
And this Volhynia tragedy periodically comes out as a problem in Polish-Ukrainian relations, and pro-Russian circles in Poland would often refer to explain to the Poles that Ukrainians are murderers, that Ukrainians are not reliable partners until they excuse themselves, and Poles being very sensitive about history, about this image of Poland being always a victim. This at least partially worked.
For Poland, definitely the Russian war is one of the reasons why it gets more support. And Russian disinformation is huge. I would say it's huge, and it exploits Volhynian massacre a lot, which is, for me, as you know, I come from the family that comes from Volhynia, like it's awful that, you know, the country which currently does genocide, which kills civilian people, currently exploits Polish traumas of the past against Ukrainians. And I think that there was a kind of expectation that due to the support, Polish support against Russia, Ukraine would do something, you know, in return, and it did not happen.
Despite the Polish demands, especially now, many barriers stand in the way of serious reconciliation between the two countries.
I would say that Ukraine is much more present in Poland than actually Poland is present in Ukraine. For Ukraine, the main issue is now Russia and how to fight Russia. When you have like a real war, You don't want to talk about, Polish traumas from the past with Poles. Facts are already established, interpretations differ, and basically when those historians meet, they just repeat the same things, and it doesn't go further anyway. It just became a clash of victimhoods, nothing else. On the other hand, this Ukrainian insurgent army became a national myth, as a myth that mobilizes Ukrainians to fight, which is kind of striking. And of course, for Poles, it's not acceptable because that was the army that, killed them during the Second World War. There is no mutual trust between Poles and Ukrainians after what happened due to this failure of historical dialogue.
Nevertheless, there has been some recent progress. For the first time, joint exhumations have begun in Volhynia, marking a cautious but hopeful step forward toward reconciliation and signaling that the decades-old disputes may move closer to resolution. While divergent memory cultures constrain the relations, trade has been long a field of strong cooperation, bringing Ukraine closer to Poland and the European Union.
Poland is really a window for Ukraine to further EU integration, because we have the common border from 19th, Poland and Ukraine began to develop their trade relations. Polish investors were interested in Ukrainian agriculture sector, energy sector, and the relations became stronger after 2004, and when in 2014 Ukraine signed the EU accession agreement. After the war, they continue to support our people because Ukrainian labor is characterized by high level of competitiveness. I see Poland as a window for Ukraine's integration into the EU, especially into the single market.
Agriculture became Ukraine's top export good. However, the 2022 invasion dramatically impacted Ukraine's economy.
The Russian aggression has had catastrophic consequences for Ukrainian agriculture. This is no doubt. For over these 3 years of the full-scale conflict, a significant number of agricultural and processing enterprises were destroyed or severely damaged. However, even during the war, Ukraine has remained a competitive agricultural producer thanks to fertile land, of course, thanks to the very favorable climate conditions, and of course a large-scale export-oriented farms with relatively low production costs.
Still, significant logistical hurdles remain due to the destruction of bridges, roads and railways. Additionally, Russia blocked by the beginning of the war the Black Sea route, to which about 60% of all Ukrainian goods were exported in 2021. These fallouts made alternative transport routes to keep goods flowing imperative. And here is where the European Union proved to play a pivotal role.
The European Union, when the war started, responded really very, very quickly by introducing the so-called solidarity lines. It was a set of logistical as well as regulatory measures that enabled Ukrainian agri-food production to reach global markets through the European territory. In addition, the European Union temporarily lifted tariffs and quotas on Ukrainian exports, allowing full access to its market. Of course, this helped stabilize Ukraine's agricultural sector as well as Ukrainian economy during the wartime, and of course it deepened ties between European Union and between Ukraine.
The economic effect of the solidarity lanes has been enormous and allowed Ukraine to export more than 85 million tons of agricultural goods since 2022. representing almost 60% of its total exports in 2024. This influx of Ukrainian agricultural goods into the European Union market has generated significant tensions with Poland. While much of this production was to be re-exported outside the European Union, a substantial share remained within Poland, creating sharp economic competition for Polish farmers.
Polish farmers really began to feel very huge pressure that has become one of key stress points in Polish-Ukrainian relations. As a result, protests erupted, political pressure mounted, and the Polish government introduced temporary import bans on Ukrainian grain in 2023.
It certainly did have a major impact on our bilateral relations some 2 years ago, let's say. And also it will probably play a major role in the future. The key point is that this is what you call European integration, okay? I mean, one day Ukraine fully joins the EU, it will be part of the common market, it will be part of the common agricultural policy, and our farmers, after some years, would have to compete with the Ukrainian farmers.
It could slow the whole process, or it could lead to some conditions such as transitional periods. However, I think agriculture should not become an obstacle to join the European Union. One compelling argument is that integrating Ukrainian agricultural production in the European Union will ultimately strengthen the Union's position in the global market. For its part, Ukrainian government and Ukrainian farmers also understand the concerns of the Polish farmers, and they are doing everything possible to minimize competition in the agricultural sector. Before the war, and even now, Ukraine succeeded in using Black Sea corridor, and already at the moment when we're speaking, around 85 to 90% of Ukraine's agri-food exports, they are running through Black Sea corridor. So that's why the pressure is much less than it was before.
Beyond the question whether bilateral relations will encourage or prevent Poland to support Ukraine's accession, it remains unclear how much a single member state could move the enlargement process forward.
The European Commission's President Ursula von der Leyen also made some very strong points on how enlargement should be seen as a strategic project for the European Union for several reasons. One of them is basically that it is, well, the most effective tool the EU has to actually stabilize the neighborhood. But we also know that, basically every of these candidate countries, they have certain problems with, democracy, rule of law, and certain other issues. And this is all to some extent multiplied if we talk about Ukraine, because basically Ukraine as a country in war, at the state of war, has, various problems. So of course, we have to keep the enlargement merit-based. There is no shortcut for any country, even, a country like Ukraine. And there is absolutely no compromise on that.
Indeed. There's a strong political support for Ukraine's European Union membership perspective. However, geopolitical considerations have taken a backseat.
I think politically we will support Ukraine, but now the problem is that political support is not essential anymore, okay? Because we are in the phase of negotiating the accession. So basically, political decision has been already made. At least one political decision on recognizing Ukraine membership perspective and on starting the negotiations. Then you have also the final decision on signing and ratifying the accession treaty. But once again, now we are in the phase when politics at least officially, play a smaller role.
Other Polish experts share this perspective. emphasizing that enlargement is a highly bureaucratic exercise.
Enlargement is a technical process, and it's very much a technocratic process, right? And the whole concept of negotiations is totally misleading because there is no negotiations, right? So we basically tell the candidate countries you have to do this and this and that, and then they have to do this, and then we might close the chapter. So that's basically how it goes. So on that point, definitely Poland and actually any other country cannot do, cannot help as much as perhaps, we could expect these countries to do it, because basically the candidate country has to do the homework.
In that context, there is a threat that Poland will focus more on its interests at the expenses of bilateral relations and also the speed of Ukraine's integration with EU. I mean, a threat. It's quite normal. So, if you ask me, I would say that what Poland was to do in the context of Ukraine getting closer to Europe, this has been already in a large part done. We've promoted for many years on political level this topic because it was of importance for us. It was of huge importance for us. We wanted to have a European neighbor. So we've been talking about that with everybody in Brussels, in Kiev, in Washington. And after many years, finally, what we wanted did happen. The problem is that it was coupled with Ukrainian wheat, Ukrainian transport competition, trucks and so on. So now during this phase of negotiations, we will be probably, as I've said, less enthusiastic, but that's a little bit how accession talks with the EU are.
But nonetheless, I do think that the EU should help these countries, and this is by far not only Ukraine, to actually, to be integrated within the European Union within certain areas and domains. And I think that security policy and especially defense cooperation is actually a great field, of integrating these countries much earlier into our common market, for example, than the full membership, because the full membership is definitely nothing that will happen fast. So for that, we'll have to wait several years. But in the meantime, we have to make sure that these countries who want to join the European Union are somehow still very much connected to us. Because if we don't manage as the EU to actually make the EU integration attractive for these countries, there will be other forces who will do this. There is, of course, Russia, and there is perhaps to a lesser extent, but also China that could be very much, interested in actually pulling these countries that are in the neighborhood of the European Union towards their sphere of interest. And that's, of course, something that would be very dangerous for the EU. I think that Poland, especially this government, so the current government, will do much in order to keep the momentum for enlargement. And we can actually, remind countries that perhaps are not so much into enlargement that, well, we not only promised, but it's very much in our own interests, so in the interest of the EU to actually, deliver on the promise.
Russia's 2022 invasion rattled Europe, but also unlocked a rare chance for Ukraine to advance toward European Union membership. For Poland, supporting Ukraine's integration is not just about friendship or politics. It's about protecting its security and the whole Western alliance from Russia's threat. But this journey is and will not be simple. Deep historical wounds and economic challenges put real pressure on their relationship. As Ukraine faced the tough, technical task of aligning with European Union rules, these sensitive issues could slow down the process. Poland's stance illuminates the fundamental dilemma facing the European Union: how to sustain hope, solidarity, and ambition in the face of complex political and economic realities. The question of Ukraine's future in the European Union goes far beyond redrawing borders or adding a new member state. It challenges the essence of what Europe stands for, what values it chooses to uphold, and how it defines its identity in an increasingly uncertain world. This decision will shape not only the political map of the continent, but also the kind of community Europe aspires to be for generations to come.